A warm welcome to the Temple of Thoughts, where we examine issues local, national, global from a very dispassionate, non partisan perspective so as to celebrate the ideals of justice, equality, freedom, and universal fellow feeling or kinship without any fear of favor. Today, we take a brief look at the Ukraine theater of war. To me, the most striking feature of this massive scene of human tragedy is that it is a theater of human hypocrisy, international hypocrisy. Let's try and look at some aspects of this. First of all, it's being hailed on the one side as a war meant to secure the security of Russia and the welfare of the people of Russia. On the other hand, the Europeans, the Americans, and those who are part of this alliance celebrate this, or at least describe it, as a war to defend democracy and human freedom. So, lip service is paid to Ukrainians for the massive and unthinkable suffering that they live by day to day as the sacrifice that they are making in order to uphold the international order, democracy, and human ideals. So let's fix these two things very clearly in our minds. Now, let's look at the various phases of this hypocrisy. The hypocrisy on the part of Russia is that it has unfettered right to attack any part of Ukraine, but Ukraine should have absolutely no right to attack any part of Russia. It's an unforgivable offense to attack even a square inch of the territory of Russia, whereas it is military prowess and sanctified right on the part of Russia to attack Ukraine at will, cause any extent of devastation, inflict the maximum possible suffering on Ukrainians. So this is one phase of that hypocrisy. But there is far greater hypocrisy on the other side. When sanctions were imposed, we know that sanctions have been kept rather poorly. The foremost concern of Europe was that this would jack up the fuel bills, and Europeans therefore would be unhappy about it. Europeans are very happy that this war is being fought on their behalf and on behalf of the ideals that they cherish. But all these ideals are as nothing compared to their energy bills. But nobody talks about this hypocrisy. As regards the Americans, they were global sponsors of democracy. But the American people are today seriously resenting, and that resentment is felt more among the members of the Republican Party, that this bill that America is picking up is too much. Now, all this does not take into account the unspeakable suffering of Ukrainians. Ukrainians have been pushed into this miserable plight by the Western forces, Americans, Europeans, and what have you. Ukraine would not have suffered like this but for the so-called Budapest Memorandum, by which Ukraine was disarmed of its nuclear arsenal. if Ukraine had maintained even 5% of the nuclear warheads it had in 2004, Ukraine would have been absolutely safe. So it was because Ukraine swallowed the peace rhetoric of America, UK, and Russia at that time that it is in its miserable plight. So the fact that Ukraine is paying this enormous price for its idealism is completely overlooked. Now take another aspect of this hypocrisy. It's beyond any doubt that Russia is committing war crimes one after the other without any inhibition. And the war crimes are not limited to spiriting away Ukrainian children into Russia in order to brainwash them and the rest of it. War crimes are happening every day in Ukraine. And there is an arrest warrant on Putin. But the judges who issued the arrest warrant knew only too well that the warrant would never be executed. Why? Because Putin is sitting on a nuclear arsenal. And to the extent that he is powerful, the arm of law is weak and timid. Nobody can touch Putin. So there is an arrest warrant, but it's not even worth the paper it is written on. So what's the message? Globally, might is right. And at the same time, a great deal is said about the international order, which must respect certain ideals, like the integrity of a nation's territory, like the unacceptability of the use of force to settle disputes, and the entire principles on which the United Nations has been set or established. Which brings me to the last point I want to make, among the many that need to be made. Look at the plight of the United Nations organization, UNO. It has revealed itself to be so pathetically impotent. The very structure of the UN is custom designed to ensure its impotence, where the interests of the mighty are involved. No sensible, effective measure can be initiated by the United Nations that goes against the interests of Russia or any of the nations that enjoy veto powers. And once again, this reality stares us in the face. So it's as though the United Nations does not exist. I wonder what we lose if this mighty organization, this very expensive organization, is wound up. So, no matter what we say about the progress that we have made in international peacekeeping and peace establishing instruments or peace guarding instruments like the United Nations, and the various formations that justify their existence on the pretext of being committed to law, rule of law, justice and human equality, human rights, so on and so forth. Please ask yourself, what human rights do the people of Ukraine have? The people of Russia, the people of America, the people of every other country have human rights. But Ukraine is not entitled to human rights as of today. And the people who are applauding Ukraine for fighting Russia so manfully are at the same time complaining about the small, insignificant, trivial inconvenience they have to face on account of the war. Consider even the Black Sea grain deal. I'm afraid the consequences of that will be felt more keenly by the poorer people of the world, which is something that I wish had not happened and would not happen. But who pays a thought to the state of extreme deprivation in which the people of Ukraine, particularly in the eastern and southern region of the country, suffer and have been suffering for how many months now? People living without water, without electricity, and some without food, and above all, without the right to life. Who pays a thought to the plight of these people? But they are meant to be fodder for the realization of the global dream of a way of life based on law and order, global ideals, democracy, protection of democracy in particular. For the people who are perishing in their thousands, what democracy? It's very unfortunate. I have now reached a stage, my friends, when I begin to think that perhaps it would be far better for the people of Ukraine to live as slaves of Russia than to live in this kind of war to which no end is in sight. America, in particular, is keenly interested in perpetuating this bleeding conflict because it suits the American interest to use Ukraine as a point of bleeding, a theater of bleeding for Russia, just as it used the Afghanistan war some time back to bleed the then USSR. There is really no sincere motive or interest in bringing this misery to an end. And Ukraine is caught in this crossfire of interest. It's helpless. It cannot control its own affairs. It has lost control over its destiny so completely. It's the most unbearable agony for me. Ever since this war broke out, it has burnt a wound within me. And I greatly resent this massive display of human hypocrisy by which the lives of poorer people or a section of humanity can be sacrificed to meet the incidental superfluous interests of the larger sections, the more affluent sections of people elsewhere. If the so-called international order can accept this and live smugly by this, I'm afraid that international order is not worth it. Because today it's the turn of Ukraine, tomorrow it will be the turn of some other country, and the turn of my country also will come. It's only a matter of time. I do not want that, and that's the reason why I'm placing these thoughts as firmly and clearly as I can before the global viewership. Thank you.